Usually when we talk about like a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of just absolute precision.
Oh, totally. It feels like engineering, right?
Yeah, exactly. You break your arm, they do an x-ray, and there's that jagged white line right there on the film. And the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is. That is the problem.
Right, because it's a binary system. I mean, the bone is either broken or it isn't.
Right.
And that visibility is actually incredibly comforting. We really like our problems to be neatly categorized,
Right.
like physically verifiable.
We really do. But then you step into the world of aesthetics or curation, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just completely useless.
Yeah, the diagnostic landscape gets deeply murky.
So murky. I mean, how do you objectively diagnose beauty? How do you look at something that is undeniably pretty and still deliver a brutal zero hesitation verdict that it just isn't good enough?
It is a really tough thing to articulate.
It is. Well, today we are looking at a piece of writing that does exactly that. We're diving into an entry from a source titled Notes on Gardening.
Specifically, this is part 878.
Right, part 878, written by an author named Ang, and published today, actually, April 27, 2026. And I got to say, it is an absolute masterclass in ruthless aesthetic diagnosis.
It really is. And for a piece of writing that is so incredibly brief, it packs this enormous philosophical punch.
Yeah.
We are looking at an evaluation of the tropical milkweed, scientifically known as Asclepias curassavica, and we're basically looking at the author's verdict on whether it deserves a place in a curated space.
And I'm just going to give you, the listener, a spoiler alert right now. The verdict is a hard, unflinching no. So, okay, let's unpack this.
The way the author opens the note is really striking, I think, because it immediately strips away any sentimentality.
Oh, completely.
Right. The text begins with just a direct answer. It's a no, followed by a promise to explain the reasoning.
Which sets up this really fascinating tension because the author doesn't deny the plant's visual appeal at all.
No, not at all. In fact, they actually acknowledge the very specific beauty of the tropical milkweed's flowers. They highlight that vibrant, eye-catching, two-toned look.
Yeah, those red outer petals and that orange inner crown.
Exactly.
But, I mean, I look at those vibrant red and orange petals and I think, well, isn't that enough?
You'd think so?
Right. If I'm walking through a garden center, that beautiful crown is what's selling me the plant. Those vivid colors are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, which is catching the eye and drawing you in.
Sure.
So why does the stem even matter if the flower is doing its job? It feels, I don't know, almost ungrateful to dismiss the whole plant just because the support structure isn't as flashy as the bloom.
Well, what's fascinating here is how the author implicitly rejects that exact line of thinking.
Really?
Yeah, because that thinking is rooted in what we call focal point aesthetics. Human biology basically wires us to look for the hero element,
Right, like the one shiny thing.
Exactly. We are drawn to bright colors, to faces, to the single blooming crown. But gardening, or really any large-scale design discipline, it requires a macro perspective.
Okay, a macro perspective.
Yeah, so the author pivots immediately from that beautiful crown to the plant's overall anatomy. They note the narrow, lance-shaped leaves that grow along the single upward stem.
Just a single stem.
Right, and that is where the structural deficit lies.
Okay, that structural deficit concept, it makes me think of like designing a billboard. But deciding to use a 12-point font for the main message.
Oh, that's a great comparison.
Right. Like the words themselves might be beautifully written, maybe profoundly poetic even. But if you're driving by on the highway, the lack of structural volume makes the message entirely invisible.
Exactly.
The beauty of the detail is just completely swallowed by the scale of the medium.
That analogy maps perfectly onto the mechanics of visual weight in a landscape.
Visual weight.
Yeah. The human eye is fundamentally lazy when it scans an environment. It's looking for solid blocks of color or, dense foliage to rest on.
Right, something substantial.
Exactly. So a single upward stem with these narrow lance-shaped leaves, it doesn't give the eye anywhere to land. It acts like a visual sieve.
A visual sieve, wow.
Yeah, your gaze basically falls right through the negative space surrounding that thin stem, straight to the dirt behind it.
Oh, I see. So the eye registers the spindly, sparse reality of the negative space before it even has a chance to process those beautiful two-tone petals at the very top.
Exactly. The macro structure is actively sabotaging the micro beauty.
Sabotaging it. Wow.
It is basically a fatal flaw in the plant's architecture. Because when you stand, say, 20 feet back from a garden bed, you don't see the intricate red and orange crown.
Right, you're too far away.
You just see a severe vertical line surrounded by awkward emptiness. The author is diagnosing this reality that a beautiful flower does not mathematically equate to a beautiful plant.
That makes a lot of sense. The supporting architecture has to actually carry the visual weight, and the tropical milkweed just simply fails to do so.
It completely fails.
But, that structural deficit isn't just an aesthetic crime. It creates a very real mathematical problem for the gardener.
Oh, big time.
Because if one spindly stem looks bad, and the eye falls right through it, the only way to force visual impact is through sheer volume.
Right.
And the text highlights this perfectly. Ang observes that these flowers are essentially, quote, too small on their own.
Yeah.
And to achieve the desired visual impact, you would need to plant a, quote, whole sea of them.
A whole sea. Yeah, the physics of the plant's anatomy just collide directly with the reality of spatial and physical resource management.
Resource management.
Using the word sea is a very deliberate choice. It indicates a massive, massive volume.
It actually reminds me of the dynamics of a choir.
Oh, how so?
Well, if you have one singer with this beautiful, tiny, really delicate voice, they're going to get completely lost in a massive concert hall. The acoustics will just swallow them whole.
Right, they wouldn't project.
Exactly. To make an impact, to actually fill that room, you can't just have that one tiny voice. You need a massive chorus of 50 people singing that exact same note.
Oh, I love that.
You need overwhelming volume to, manufacture the presence that the individual lacks.
Exactly. The necessity of scale is exactly what the author is grappling with here. But here is where the curator's mindset sort of diverges from the collector's mindset.
Okay.
The author explicitly concludes that planting this sea is, and this is a quote, too much work for a garden that needs to stand out even for a potted plant.
Okay, I read that line, and I have to wonder, though. Is the author just looking for a lazy shortcut?
You think so?
Well, when someone says something is too much work, it often translates to just avoiding the necessary effort to achieve something great.
Interesting.
I mean, if the red and orange crown is truly that stunning, shouldn't a dedicated gardener be willing to put in the labor to plant the sea?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, I would strongly argue that this has absolutely nothing to do with laziness. No, it is actually the height of pragmatism and efficient design. The text reveals this core, unyielding philosophy. A garden, quote, needs to stand out. That is the operational goal.
Okay, the operational goal.
Now, consider the constraints. Any designer, or really any listener tuning in right now, operates within finite parameters.
Right. Time, money.
Exactly. You have a limited allocation of spatial bandwidth. You have constrained amounts of soil volume, water, square footage, and honestly, cognitive energy.
Yeah, it's like the economics of curation. You aren't just buying a plant, you're spending your limited canvas on it.
Precisely. And if a plant cannot achieve the operational goal of standing out without requiring a disproportionate monopoly on those finite resources, it is a fundamentally inefficient investment.
Inefficient, yeah.
Planting a sea of tropical milkweed isn't just a matter of digging dozens of holes. It means allocating a massive percentage of your visual real estate to compensate for a single plant's structural inadequacy.
Wow. So you are actively subsidizing the plant's architectural failure with your own labor and space?
That is exactly it. You're subsidizing its failure.
Which totally explains why Ang notes this inefficiency applies even for a potted plant.
Right.
Because even when you scale the entire project down to a single terracotta container on a balcony, the ratio of effort to visual payoff remains stubbornly broken.
It does.
The container still demands to stand out, and that single spindly stem still completely fails to fill that geometric space.
Yeah, because scaling down a flawed design simply scales down the flaw. The return on investment is fundamentally bankrupt regardless of the square footage.
Bankrupt. That's a strong word, but it fits perfectly.
Recognizing that disproportionate drain on resources isn't an avoidance of hard work. It is a highly refined sense of spatial boundary.
Right.
The effort required to overcome the plant's severe structural deficit transforms it from a design asset into a design liability.
That brings us to a really crucial realization about the text, I think, because this ruthless evaluation of the effort to impact ratio clearly isn't a spontaneous one-off decision.
No, not at all.
This isn't just like a bad afternoon where the author was feeling tired and didn't want to deal with planting a sea of stems.
Right. They didn't just wake up cranky.
Exactly. This verdict represents a deeply ingrained historical rulebook that governs their entire approach to design. And we see the mechanics of this rule book exposed through the second plant that's mentioned in this incredibly short entry.
We do. The author concludes the note by stating they are skipping the tropical milkweed for the exact same reason they have been reluctant to explore the Mexican Petunia,
Right.
which is scientifically known as Ruellia simplex, by the way. And they've been avoiding it for, and I quote, all these moons.
All these moons. I just love that. It's such a poetic phrasing, but it reveals an immense amount of historical weight.
It really does.
And I think we all have versions of this in our own lives, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Like you listening right now probably have that one complicated software tool you refuse to learn, or that one recurring meeting you dodge for moons because you just know it's a trap.
A total trap.
It looks shiny or it sounds productive on paper, but you know structurally is going to drain you.
Yeah.
But holding on to an aesthetic grudge against the Mexican Petunia for that long? I mean, doesn't that imply a level of rigidity?
How do you mean?
Well, isn't gardening, or really any creative endeavor, supposed to be about continuous experimentation? It feels like the author might be missing out on potential beauty by relying on this ancient grudge.
That is a fair question, and it touches on a fundamental paradox of expertise.
Okay.
Think about it. How is high-level curation actually maintained when you are faced with a world of infinite choices? There are thousands of plant cultivars available at any given nursery.
Sure. Endless options.
Right. If a designer evaluates every single one from scratch, relying solely on trial and error for every new encounter, they would succumb to profound decision fatigue.
Oh, yeah. The cognitive load would be completely paralyzing.
Exactly. So the phrasing all these moons, paired with the fact this is part 878 of their gardening notes, it gives us the context we need.
Right. Part 878.
We are looking at a massive data set of personal experience. 878 entries represent a staggering amount of previous trial and error.
A massive data set. That makes a lot of sense.
And when a practitioner accumulates that volume of experience, they synthesize it into heuristics.
Mental shortcuts.
Yes, mental shortcuts that preserve their decision-making energy. The Mexican Petunia serves as the ultimate precedent in Ang's cognitive rulebook.
Okay, so the Mexican Petunia is the precedent.
Right. We don't even need to know the specific anatomical flaws of the Ruellia simplex to understand its function within the text. Its function is to serve as the definitive benchmark for the category of structurally inefficient plants that demand too much work for the visual payoff.
Oh, I love that. It's basically the anchor of their do not plant list.
Exactly.
So the moment the author identified the same structural deficit in the tropical milkweed, that massive gap between the micro beauty of the crown and the macro reality of the spindly stem, the heuristic just triggered.
Bingo. The historical avoidance of the Mexican Petunia instantly validates the rejection of the tropical milkweed.
That is fascinating.
It really is a fascinating glimpse into how experts utilize personal criteria to rapidly filter out overwhelming noise. The grudge isn't stubbornness, and it isn't a lack of curiosity.
Right.
The grudge is actually a highly evolved defense mechanism against mediocrity.
A defense mechanism against mediocrity. That is a great way to put it. By saying a hard no to the structural inefficiency of the tropical milkweed, Ang is fiercely protecting the physical and mental bandwidth required to say yes to plants that actually align with the operational goal.
Exactly. It protects the capacity to build a standout garden.
Right. And it really elevates the concept of the skip from a passive lack of action to an active, aggressive design choice.
It is an active choice.
Knowing what to actively exclude is basically the invisible architecture of any great curation.
It is. The ability to bypass the temptation of focal point aesthetics to look at those vibrant red and orange petals and still walk away, that requires immense discipline.
Oh, massive discipline.
The author is prioritizing the holistic integrity of the garden over the isolated beauty of a single flower.
So what does this all mean for us? Because we've traveled quite a distance through a very brief piece of writing.
We really have.
We started with this up-close, almost microscopic appreciation for a vibrant, two-toned flower crown. And we saw how easily the eye is seduced by that micro beauty.
Right.
But then we zoomed out, applying that X-ray vision to the plant's macrostructure, revealing the architectural failure of those narrow leaves and that single upward stem.
Yeah, we examined how that structural deficit creates severe negative space, turning the plant into a visual sieve rather than a structural anchor.
And from there, we uncovered the mathematical reality of trying to fix that deficit.
The C problem.
Right, the C problem. We explored the concept of spatial bandwidth, realizing that compensating for poor architecture requires an exhausting, inefficient C of planting. Just a disproportionate allocation of resources that fails the fundamental requirement of a standout garden.
And finally, we contextualize that rejection within the framework of expert heuristics. We saw how Part 878 and All These Moons represent a profound catalog of experience.
Right, where the Mexican Petunia acts as that cognitive benchmark to quickly filter out inefficient investments and protect the curator's decision-making energy.
Exactly.
So really, this deep dive isn't just about Asclepias, curassavica, or even gardening at its core.
No, not at all.
It is about the brutal, necessary art of curation in any domain. When your time, your energy, and your space are finite, you simply cannot afford to invest in things that only look good under a magnifying glass.
You really can't.
You have to evaluate the macro structure of what you're letting into your ecosystem.
You must cultivate the willingness to deliver the hard no, even when the micro details are genuinely beautiful.
Absolutely. And to you, our listener, we want to leave you with a concept to examine in your own life today. Take this framework, this aesthetic x-ray, if you will, and look beyond the garden. Look at your calendar, your project management dashboard, or even your personal commitments. Are you currently maintaining any tropical milkweeds?
Think about it. Consider the things in your life right now that are undeniably beautiful up close.
Right.
Perhaps it's a side project that sounds incredibly prestigious in a one-sentence pitch, or a social obligation that feels briefly rewarding in the moment.
Yeah.
But when you zoom out and look at the macro structure of your week, do they create vast, awkward, negative space? Do they fundamentally require a massive sea of your time and effort just to justify their existence in your ecosystem?
Basically, are you subsidizing a structural failure with your own exhaustion, trying to build a chorus of 50 voices just to make one delicate note heard?
Identifying those inefficiencies is the first step, because once you see the structural deficit clearly, you might just find the clarity to do what Aang did. You can appreciate the vivid red and orange colors for what they are, acknowledge the beauty of the crown, and then confidently, methodically decide to skip it.
Keep questioning the underlying architecture of the things that catch your eye. Protect your spatial bandwidth, and really, don't be afraid to utilize the philosophy of the skip. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.